And hand it over to Edwin. So let's give a warm welcome to our panelists. Here we go.
Thank you. Thank you. Testing. Testing. Yeah, it does work. Hi, my name's Ed Stussy. I'm an intellectual property attorney at Orrick, Carrington, and Sutcliffe down in Los Angeles, specializing in patents. And I'm moderating with the folk who are up here. Amir is the CEO of Sixense. Shauna is an advisor to startups as well as corporations, larger entities on the burgeoning VR business. Marc is an angel investor in a number of VR firms, a few VR firms. And I think the opening question, just to get the basis down, is what are we defining as intellectual property here? What is IP? What is IP within the realm of virtual reality? Marc?
Sure. I mean, there's two primary categories, I think, is the large body of patents, and those can be relevant to everyone in the industry in terms of things like, is Apple going to ever assert some of their patent portfolio, and they could have some very fundamental patents. And then there's literary IP, or the title IP, especially in the entertainment sector, but it applies, I think, across the board in terms creative IP, if you want to call it that. But I would, it is the title itself, and I think that's a very, very important for early stage developers and companies creating products, is to understand how both work, right? Basically.
Yeah, I think, and then on the other side you have, so on one side you have creative IP, which is when you think of something like Marvel or Disney, big name titles and whatnot. And then you have IP that refers to technical, and that can break down into a lot of subcategories. But let's say for the sake of VR, on the technical side, IP comes down to source code or particular technologies that you're creating, or a hardware or a process. And so for a lot of developers, I think, in this community who are developing on game engine platforms or creating their own platform, IP comes down to kind of a source code definition.
So I believe that a good example would be Sixense. As a company, and when you look at Sixense, you hopefully can use that as a reference to how you go about starting a VR company, and then or developing for a VR platform. Sixense was founded by myself and a couple of other guys for the purpose of making interaction with digital media intuitive. You look at our name was all about engaging your sixth sense in the way you interact with digital media, and obviously virtual reality and augmented reality is by far the best way to go and look about it. Now, we did not intend to develop everything from A to Z, meaning not to go about developing technologies, hardware or software. We decided to create a specific experience and deliver it to mass market consumers. And to do so, we needed to understand what's available, where we can get it to create that solution, and what we have to create. And that's the definition of IP. What's missing, meaning what do I need to invent? Invention is IP. If something that was not existing before, I need to invent it. If I'm inventing it, I can submit and file for patents. The point is that we found out very early, since I've done my first VR experience, developed a simulator back in 1994, that the headset, for example, is in public domain. You cannot protect it. Almost everything that you can do about headsets, you cannot protect. So we decided, leave the headset alone. Make everything but a headset. Let companies like Facebook and Sony and others to create headsets. And then you go and you start thinking, okay, now, what else do you need for fully immersive, for what we call full presence? And then we came down to the point you need full interaction. So you need motion tracking that is fast enough. Then many other aspects that we're going to discuss soon. But IP And that's where every mature or every market that will consider itself ready for prime time must address the intellectual properties that is owned by smaller or bigger companies before they make decisions how to go about their business.
Well, I think I have a case study then to throw to the panel. I'm backing a company that's actually here on the floor. Ape Lab is in the HTC section. Emily Jolie, the founder's here. The company started in Switzerland to address the VR market. Actually, they were addressing the 360 video market with storytelling, animated storytelling and computer-generated graphics in storytelling and gaming. And they found that there wasn't enough gaze-based, gyroscopic gaze-based tools at their disposal. Unity didn't have enough, and they found that they needed more. And they were in an incubator that was affiliated with the university that they all graduated from, the founders. And the incubator in Switzerland pushed them to start a patent process, which they did. The incubator paid for the patent process, and they started it. And now they've got this patent process that's moving forward. Fortunately, you can address this. It's a treaty-based, non-U.S. patent process, so it follows a different course. But the challenge is that they continue to move forward and try to figure out how to value the patent itself versus the technical IP that they're creating in the tool, in the Unity SDK and the Unreal SDK. And then they're also using that approach to differentiate their products. So I think this is kind of an interesting case. It's a very small company, but here they have this. They started a patent process. They probably wouldn't have done it had they not been urged by the business affairs and the legal staff on this incubator. So
And that legal staff, the people who encourage them, they have a vested interest in that company because they're affiliated with the accelerator, so they are.
Well, it's in Europe, a lot of the incubators that are affiliated with universities don't take equity stakes. Mm-hmm. They do have the stake in the sense that they want them to succeed. And that is why they said, well, it sounds like you have they were solving a novel problem. They felt a novel problem. Now, what they weren't able to do, obviously, was dig through the thousands of patents that exist already in the VR space to determine whether there was prior art. They did some of that. They've done the initial process, but I think it's quite interesting because we confront new and novel approaches, and maybe you can talk about software patenting and technology patenting in this context.
As the lawyer on the panel, what Marc's discussing here, there's a dichotomy right now between Europe and the United States vis-a-vis software patents. For about the last year and a half, it's been very, very difficult to get and enforce software patents in the United States. It's very much easier to do so in Europe, and the situation is still kind of unstable in the U.S. So it might well be easier to get your patents started in Europe. Get them. The treaty is there's a standard treaty organization that works worldwide, and then you can start the process in the United States. But you've got the basis then in Europe that they have obviously in Switzerland. Are patents important with the people that you're talking to, or is it primarily soft IP, copyrights, trade secret, source code?
I think pretty much with the developers that I'm working with or supporting as a board advisor, they're still, because VR is so new in theory in this consumer version, developers are trying to figure out first, parsing out what is their creative versus what is their technical IP. And I think for some of them, before any of these hurdles get, or maybe concurrently with the hurdles, is trying to figure out when they aren't part of an accelerator or they aren't, part of a university system. And these are great ecosystems to be a part of, but what happens when you're an independent developer working with your own funding, which usually means even fewer resources and whatnot? How do you engage with a lawyer? How do you engage with business professionals that can help you navigate your way through the patent process, or even those early stages of identifying what that IP might be?
It's really about, if you think about from the investor perspective, and when we started Sixense in 2007, we funded it ourselves. We did not go to VCs, or initially not even to angels. We funded it ourselves. And And when you do so, you are very careful not to spend your money on things that are already there, and you can just license or bring them in, acquire them, and you invest your money where there's a great opportunity, when you actually see that, wow, this will have a huge effect in the future. If you believe in immersive computing, if you believe in VR and AR, then yes, it was worth it. So, you know, when we made a decision, when we identified the latency problem, we realized very early, back in 2009, 8 and 9, that when we move, at the time we were working on an application, it's a welding training simulation in VR. And for them, you are being graded. This is a professional training application. You're being graded how fast you do things, how precise you do it. So we had to create the hardware and software and middleware technologies that were not available. And one of the things that we found a big problem was there was too much latency. The way computers were architected, you know, the rendering of the torch gun was getting from the GPU the same priority as the room around it. And that made no sense to us. So, and we could not meet the latency requirement because in VR, obviously we all know we get sick immediately if there's an, or you don't believe the experience. So we had to create technologies, and then when we realized that first we searched if we can find anything that was done for the last 30 years, since VR been there for 30 plus years. And we saw that it wasn't done, so we had to submit patents that handle different prioritization for latency on rendering. And we got this patent awarded, and now basically every company is using it, and it's wonderful because it's what's going to make this type of experience possible. But again, it's about identifying what's not available and submitting patents so you can get it protected, so when the market gets to the point where there is a commercial opportunity, you can get a return and you can save other companies, small or big, the trouble of developing the same thing that you've developed, you know, 5, 6, 7 years ago.
Can you give examples of the companies now using your patents?
So what we do as a company, we license all our reference design to other companies. So welding companies are using our technology, actually a few of them. So for training, for professional training, we save them years and years of development. The only thing they need to do is dress content on top of it. For education, we have a company that uses it to actually educate kids about the way the brain works. They just come in, they create a solution, they package it all in, they know they have full protection. Some of them are public companies, they have to be, you know, protected. And, you know, we have many companies. We have a name called Bandai using our technology. We have, you know, we have a lot of different companies. We have over 19 different licensees. And one of them are giants that will be in a press release very soon. I cannot just go about discussing it in specifics. But I can tell you that companies like Sony, for example, has the largest portfolio of patents right now, over 300 very specific VR patents that are going to be, you know, Sony's just sitting back, relaxing, enjoying the craze. Everybody is in one way or another infringing on Sony patents. And that's because they've been doing it for the last 15 years. And doing it, you know, with inferior headsets and all that kind of stuff. You know, that's before the latest, you know, Morpheus or you know, PlayStation VR. But they've been doing it for so long that, you know, we need to be very aware. And developers that are developing for platforms, I will develop first for the PlayStation because I know that platform, you know, will always be there now. And then also, again, I'm a big believer in what HTC is doing with Valve, and Valve is very sensitive to doing things right, but still, there is a big question. A lot of the technology is being presented, a lot of the solution being presented. No one is, at the moment, looking at do they have the right to use it?
So bringing this down to a small company level, if a small company is developing a tool set, for back to my case study, there's a tool set that's a plug-in to Unity, but it does something very novel and different. Aren't there ways of protecting that don't follow a patent process? Or would you recommend to a small developer, which path?
Don't take this as legal advice. There are a number of ways of being able to protect IP, and particularly if you've got a tool such as that. One of them being using source code. And if you've got source code, then it's something that's not readily evident, it's not readily reverse engineerable, so you can keep it as a trade secret, in which case you don't need to file a patent. All you need to do is take some measures to keep that particular source code secret, and it ends up being protectable. On the other hand, if someone then develops the same technology that looks exactly like yours, you have no way of going after them. Trade secret only helps if someone takes your technology, if an employee takes your technology and then goes to a competitor. Patents, on the other hand, though they're more difficult to get, are more powerful because then if somebody comes up with the same idea, even independently anywhere else, and tries to sell it in the U.S., I'm sorry, they're infringing. You have an actionable right that you can do. I want to walk back to the Sony example, where Sony, you say, is stockpiling 300-odd virtual reality patents and possibly sitting on them, waiting to bring in an infringement case at some point once the industry burgeons. There is an historical case where Sony was the victim of this. And I'm speaking out of memory here, so undoubtedly a bunch of this is wrong. There was a Texas company that developed the JPEG compression algorithm and had a patent on it. Nonetheless, they released it and gave it away for free for 15, 20 years. And then only after it had been out there for 15, 20 years and it had been developed and placed into all sorts of machinery, all sorts of software, they started to ask for license fees. And then when people wouldn't give them license fees, then they would take people to court for infringing their patent rights. And Sony was one of the victims of that, if I remember correctly, in which case they might just be saying, hi, someone did this to us, we'll do it to someone else. Anyway. But I want to go on with what Marc was saying, which is, hi, we've got a lot of people, we've got Silicon Valley entrepreneurs here who are interested in, a number of people who are starting up or in early stages of running virtual reality companies. What would you advise them to do in terms of their intellectual property?
Well, that's one of my points, is that I'm not sure I would have advised the company that I'm backing to actually go through the patent process, because software patents are not clear. Mm-hmm. But in retrospect, and now in dealing with the process, I see that there could be potential value. Having some, but for small companies to play with the big dogs, I don't know if that makes sense. It's so these are questions. I think
I'm sorry, I need to address that.
Okay.
No, that is what patents are for. They are for the small companies to attack the big dogs, and this is why they exist. Because they are enforceable rights. You can go up against the big company, and if it's absolutely clear that they are infringing, I'm sorry, you get a license out of them. That's exactly what the patent system is for. And it's one of the reasons why you've had a number of the large companies reacting against the patent system and have spent a great deal of money trying to undermine it in the past few years.
But you're talking about a use of funds, especially if a company is taking on, is venture-backed or taking on early-stage capital, that you have to devote to that protection of a patent. A patent is a much higher degree of protection, right?
It is a much higher degree of protection, yes.
But see, that's the misconception. If you don't go through the process of, it's almost like due diligence to what are you doing. If you do not, before you go through the filing, you're going through the search. You're going through a search where you go through professional searches if you use firms, that will recommend to do a professional search where you identifying what's the existing IP out there, and then you decide, what path to take about filing for IP. If you don't do that, you might be not only spending your venture money, you might be spending very valuable time of very talented people on doing something that they never have a chance to ever see any value out of that. And I can tell you even worse than that. The companies that you hope one day to sell your company to, and I'm going to use the names of the company. I'm not saying that they are the company to worry about. I'm not saying, but companies as big as Apple and Microsoft and Samsung and Facebook and Google, if you don't have IP, and they will talk to you, unless you have amazing people that they'll do acqui-hire. If you don't have IP to protect whatever application, technology, hardware, software that you have, they will go through the process until they find out whether or not you have any protection, any IP protection on that. And if you don't, they will just do it. And you'll never, because you're a small company, and you might be even a $100 million revenue company, you're still tiny compared to them, and you'll never be able to get the funding to compete with them in a court. So IP is a critical process for deciding what to work on, and then, get yourself value in the eyes of investors.
Absolutely. And from the perspective of a developer, it becomes you have to kind of switch your mindset, because often you're thinking about what is the VR product or the immersive product that I'm creating for consumers to purchase or consume or whatever. But then really the other track is, what is the IP that I'm creating that is the product that I will sell to a VC? Because or to an Apple or a Google or a Facebook or any of the big companies. What is it that the consumer is going to buy from me? And then what is it that is valuable about that IP? Because that IP is your product, it's you, and it's going to be what creates value to your company. And I know it sounds simple, because we all talk about it day in and day out with our jobs, but from a developer's perspective, oftentimes they're very focused on the content that's going to be consumed on a daily basis. And they're like, hey, that's great, sales, and that's how I'll generate revenue. But really, there's that secondary and more valuable product, and that more valuable product is IP. So for the developers out there who are just starting this process, to go back to what Amir is saying, is that you have to find out if there's anyone else with that product on the market. Like, it's very simple. And you have to do your due diligence, and going after a patent is a good way to do with it. But at the crossroads is, I'm a young developer, I'm trying to figure out if I even have enough money to drive down to SVVR this week, versus how do I afford a lawyer to help me figure this out? It's complicated, it's scary, I want to sit in front of my computer and make games or make applications and things like that. I don't want to venture out into the world. So I think part of it is trying to figure out a way to support the outside the accelerator program, developers trying to find a way through the process without being scared off by it.
Yeah, I think these are excellent points. It's still very daunting, and I think having a guidebook is very important for a lot of early stage developers. Maybe you want to address that.
I was going to say, what do you mean by a guidebook?
Well, a checklist of things that you should do to protect your IP.
Okay.
You're talking about. In my world of being in video games for almost 20 years and creating original properties in video games, and working with companies that create original properties, the usual line of defense is, for tool sets, it's trade secret. It's not usually going through a patent process. And then there's the copyright process, which can be handled in Southern California, and that mentality. You go to the Writers Guild and make sure that you put your that intellectual property in. I mean, maybe with Amir. Well, what I'd like to ask you is, what do you, in terms of the IP that Sixense is creating? You're creating some creative IP or some literary IP, and then you have your patents. Where do you think you're going to be? I mean, for you, it's pretty clear where your most value is.
Let me. First of all, it's not daunting. It's not daunting. It's doing a business plan is daunting. Doing a white paper, why and how are you going to develop a certain solution, technology? That's not daunting. That's why we all work 24/7, because we have so much passion to what we are doing. I think the daunting part is sitting in front of a VC, and don't take it, I don't know if you're a VC, and trying to explain them, since most of them have no clue what you're talking about, why what you're doing is going to change the world. But putting into a white paper, giving it to a patent attorney and telling him, let's file a provisional, it will cost at most, even with big giant firms here, even, and again, it's all on you. You do a white paper, you follow some instruction from your patent attorney, and it costs maximum, if you don't know how to negotiate that, I can easily provide you attorneys, $5,000 at most. Then the beautiful thing about it, you had a white paper that you had forced yourself to sit down, understand what the hell are you doing. And it's not just for you as a founder. It's for you as a founder. It's for the people you're recruiting. You need to compete on recruiting these developers and engineers. Doesn't matter software or hardware. There's huge competition against Google and Facebook and Oculus and Samsung and all these guys. They're all fighting and they have a lot more money to pay. If you cannot excite them that you are creating something that is going to change the world, they're not going to come to you. So you do this white paper. Everybody's sold on it. Everybody being the founders and the initial team. Then you go and submit a provisional. A good thing about provisionals, it gives you a year of priority. It gives you a year. You can take a provisional about a solution, and out of it can come 10 patents. You describe your solution, you write it, it gives you the date. So you submit it today, and then you have a year to do development, soul searching, really, what part of it am I really going to do, and then you start filing specific patents. A US patent should not cost more than $20,000 to file. Again, I'm not negotiating for you, but it should not. And we don't pay more than 15 because we do a lot. So I would go back and find a patent attorney, not a patent firm, the attorney within the firm that knows what the hell you're talking about, because a lot of them are in chemistry and whatever. You need, if you are in electronic engineering, make sure that that attorney knows what they're doing, or patent attorney knows what they're doing. And there's a big difference between, the different, litigation versus prosecution. There's different things that you need to know, but that's too much detail. The point is, you file patents. I personally do not recommend, from my experience, to file in Japan. There's liabilities in filing in Japan. There's certain ways the Japan patent world works. You can ask your experts. And Europe is very specific. If it's hardware, you can file in Europe. If it's software, it's a waste of time.
Second. This is how I like to help frame it up for developers who are new to all of this, and even corporations. But the idea of what is that white paper? Like, what does that look like when you're staring at the white, the blank page? What is your white paper going to look like? And I always say, when you click on TechCrunch or The Verge, and it shows you the patent applications for Magic Leap or for the new thing Apple is cooking up, or any of those sorts of technical drawings and things like that. I'm like, that's your white page. What are they going to publish about you 3 years from now? That is that white page. What is that initial sketch? What is that initial idea? And how are you going to back it up? And when you put it in context like that for them, they kind of have a better sense. Like, oh yeah, I've seen those on in the trades online and things like that. The crazy pictures with the mannequin with the the headset on or whatever. That it just helps them. It gives them a visual reference to aim for. Like, that's what you want to create when it comes to what a white paper is. Figuring out how to pay for the process of a $5,000 or $15,000 patent process, or the provisional. That's got to come into the picture at some point in time. But start small with putting your idea down.
Just to fill in a couple of blanks and to confirm a few things. The numbers that Amir is mentioning here are more, or at least more or less on target. Just to give you an idea of what provisional patent is. Provisional patent is something that you file with the Patent and Trademark Office in the United States. It is never looked at by anyone. It is simply it's taken into the Patent and Trademark Office, and it buys you time, gives you a date, gives you a priority date. No one can come in and take your idea or your patent anytime after you've actually filed that provisional patent. It's inexpensive to do, and then the real patent that you filed, the expensive $20,000 patent that needs to be filed, doesn't need to be filed for another year, but you've maintained that priority date. Your ideas are safe once you put in that provisional patent. In terms of how to divvy things up when you're doing a startup, obviously money is always going to be short. You need to figure out, how much am I going to put into my patents? How much am I going to put into my other forms of intellectual property? All of that is important. Other thoughts? Questions from the audience? Just to repeat the question, Amir had mentioned not Japan, not Europe for software, but do you have other places that you would recommend?
Just to clarify, I would not file for anything in Japan. Forget about hardware or software. Japan is got like, you file and they make it public. The moment they make it, everything is becoming public. There's no protection of 18 months like in the US. It gives the giant companies enough time to reverse engineer, go around you, and it's over. Europe, we find Europe just difficult to work with software, but I would just file, especially talking about startups, focus US. If it's a real solution, if it's something that has value, you will be able to make your case with US. If you can get the US patent, you will be able to enforce it worldwide because nobody can do anything outside of, without the US market. I mean, no big company especially. So I would stick with the US.
One second, I wanted to add to this. One of the reasons to stick with the U.S. is it's got a better developed litigation system, one where people can protect their patents and get substantial licensing fees. One of the reasons Japan is bad is because if you try to enforce your patent rights in Japan, historically they've not given licensing fees through their court systems. So it's almost not worthwhile to file the patent. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yes, what if you're a South American-based company, and how's the process there if you want to patent some
Okay.
software?
My 2 cents on this is, what's your market? Is your market in South America? Then you need to patent or you need to work with your intellectual property rights that are there. Everyone who's here, because I believe you're looking at a worldwide market. In that case, you're looking at the United States to start with, or you're looking at Europe to start with, more likely than not. And it might be specific depending on the kind of technology that you're developing. Anyone else want to?
So it's a lot of technical information. I don't want to go too deep into it, but it goes like this. Doesn't matter where you are, US first. When you file the US first, it gives you time for the rest of the world. You have about a year. I'm not an advisor in patents. I'm just giving you what we, you have some time. Then if you believe that there's huge value in filing in Europe, for example, you can pay X dollars for the European Unions, and it gives you another 18 months extension to file patents there. There's a lot that you can do. I will not spend too much time outside of the US unless you have a real patent that has, if it's hardware, it might be worth it. I don't want to go too deep into it. We have only one patent we filed all over the world.
Just the experience here with the Swiss company there, the incubator suggested that they go to London and to a patent attorney that works with early stage companies in this domain in software development, and that was revealing because there are timing issues that come into play if you start in Europe that allow you to go slower in the States, and that can be an advantage as well. But you need to find the right counsel, and that's extremely important, and that's probably available where you're at. Or you can look at both. I would suggest London and the U.S. at the same time, because.
Yeah. The other thing I want to double down on something that Amir said, which is when you find the attorney who's actually going to be writing your patent, do make sure that they have the background to actually understand what's going on, because patent attorneys are supposed to have a science background of one sort or another. Otherwise, they don't get licensed by the Patent and Trademark Office. And you need to find somebody who's not got a background in chemistry or biology, for instance, if what you're doing is a VR headset or a software system that allows you to do something particular with a torch. We've got about 2 more minutes. Any last questions from the audience?
I don't know, if there are some examples that might inspire us in a way that your idea of like a white paper. What does the patent look like?
So a neighbor of mine is the inventor of the multi-touch. Okay? Can you imagine? He's not working. And he was a tiny company. Now he's part of Apple. The point is, I'll give you a good example. You reminded me of Sony. Sony, there's a company, it's a non-company, still small, called Immersion. They make haptics and haptics technologies, professional technologies, consumer technology, every Xbox controller, every DualShock for Sony PlayStation. Microsoft settled with Immersion. Nobody knows how much, but it's going to be 100+ million. Sony fought Immersion. Sony never settles. Sony doesn't like patents. They like to believe that they invented everything themselves. So they fight, and they fought Immersion and lost $400 million. And if you thought that Immersion for haptics is nothing, what did you make? $400 million just from Sony alone, full cash, no, 100% margin. So I can give you in here, in Silicon Valley, hundreds and hundreds of companies that are consistently being valued, especially by investors, by not only the IP portfolio that they have already, but the path, the strategy. They call it IP strategy. If you have a slide deck, you better have an IP strategy slide. Because if you don't, I can tell you, my partner, which is a very big money guy, is not going to talk to you.
So what does an IP strategy look like? On your deck, that page is going to look like Mataio, which was purchased by Apple, a quick overview, 2-sentence of what Mataio was and what they sold to Apple for. Other examples of that. So then, Nicole, for you, say you're creating content right now, a really excellent piece of content at that. For you, it's going to be, on the content side, it's more, especially in the early days of VR, it's a little bit more challenging to come up with that if you don't have a piece of hardware or an algorithm or a code associated with it. Trying to figure out what your slide deck looks like. It will probably include something like what Baobab got for their funding, Primrose got for their funding. Start looking at what content creators got for their funding. And that's not valuing IP per se, but it is pegging a value to VR content being created. There were 6 investors that said the value of Baobab was X dollars. There were 5 investors that said Primrose was valued at X dollars. Verse, same thing. So just start going through and looking at what the content creators are getting invested for, what their equity stake is. And there's some easy math backwards about that, which basically you times the number that a seed round goes for, and that talks about what the valuation of it is, blah, 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 lots of math. But that'll give you a sense of where to start.
I think we're in your last one. Okay, I think that's a wrap. Thank you guys for coming here. Thank you all for being here with us.